I'm in Hong Kong. Though I can, like you, I can make my background look like anywhere.
All right, well, this works. It's my phone.
Yes.
What? Yes, it works.
Yep, can hear you.
I thought I'd join you in on the suit game. So
There you go, Manish. Manish was getting a little bit concerned that there's nobody, complimenting him. So there you go, Manish.
Yeah, I can come.
I don't think my
I have a virtual suit.
appropriate.
We appreciate that. So Kevin, are we good? Given I have a packed roster of speakers with multiple points of view, we should probably get started sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think so. If you're good to go, you can go ahead and start.
Also, you asked Kalayanamit is my last name. Kalayanamit.
All right. So I think we're right to get started. There's a good amount of people already joining us. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the session today. This is the next in our series of Australia ASEAN Digital Trade Standards webinars and various forums that we've been running around various of the aspects of digital trade and digital trade standards that we are looking into. And today we're actually revisiting a topic around connectivity, looking at 5G and how different 5G is really. Before I get started, I'd like to just go through some of the normal acknowledgements and house rules. So as we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emergent, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I would also like to acknowledge the elders from all the lands and language groups across all of our ASEAN member states. And we would like to begin in that vein by thanking our ASEAN partners and colleagues, particularly the members of the ACCSQ, the ASEAN Consultative Committee on Standards and Conformance, and the subgroup through which a lot of the digital trade work is now focused in terms of enabling digital trade progression and standards, the Digital Trade Standards and Conformance Working Group, and we thank those participants. On this same side, we'd also like to thank Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, and Australian Aid for funding this initiative and the program. In terms of the running of this program and the setting up of this webinar, I'd like to thank our colleagues at the Australian APEC Study Centre at RMIT, in particular Kevin Nguyen, Lynn Zakaria and Bonnie Rivendell, and my colleagues at Access Partnership, in particular Gareth Tan and Grace Gown. My name, for those who don't know me, is Peter Lovelock. I run something called the Fair Tech Policy Pillar at Access Partnership. With that out of the way, we have an exciting panel, not least because of the area that it covers, 5G. And there's been lots of questions about 5G. There is lots of interest, excitement, and at times a lot of confusion. One of the outstanding questions which we've come into this seminar with is, how different is 5G really? What is it that distinguishes 5G? Why is it a big deal, if it is a big deal? We had a transformation as we moved into the 3G era. Many people have now experienced and come through this idea of 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G, and the terminology gets thrown around. But there's an expectation that as we've shifted 3G, 4G, 5G, 5G isn't simply about some more speed or some more connectivity. There's something different going on here. And what is it and why? There's a lot of investment going into 5G. What's required and what are we going to see from it? within that context, there's a few issues that we would like to get to. We have a little less than an hour and a half, 90 minutes to run through. I have 4 speakers. I'm going to introduce them very briefly in 1 second, but I would like to just note, and I'll do it again as we move through the webinar, that for the participants who've joined us, if you would like to participate and ask your questions, please do use the chat function in the sidebar. Or if you would like, as we move into the Q&A session of this, to participate, please raise your hand function, and my colleagues at RMIT, Kevin and Lynn, will help to turn you on so that you can participate. I'll raise that again later. But let me get to the speakers, because we have very, very excellent speakers today with us. Mr. Minash Kasliwal, who is the Vice President and Chief Business Development Officer at ATC, the American Tower Company in the Asia Pacific, working to drive growth and address regulatory matters in the region. And we tend to think this is one of the fundamental issues that's driving across the industry, the issue of shared infrastructure. And the tower issues have been one that can really drive not only the mobile accessibility and connectivity, but the changed mindset that we are moving through around shared infrastructure initiatives. So I'm going to be looking forward to getting to Manisha's points. Fawad Siddiqui, who is the Senior Partner for Asia Pacific at Japan at Bell Labs Consulting, and advises ICT and enterprise sector clients while also studying new business models around automation. Shannon, given that we've got your microphone working on, I could embarrass myself and say Shannon Kale and Amitra, but I'll get it wrong. So rather than that, I'm going to say, Shannon, why don't you give us your name so that everyone hears you say it correctly?
Hi, I'm Shannon Kalyanamit.
See, much easier, and it sounds much better when Shannon says it. Shannon's the CEO and founder of 5G Catalyst Technologies, providing solutions for smart cities, healthcare, manufacturing, telecommunications in Thailand. And David Turkington, who is the head of technology for Asia Pacific region at GSMA, pardon me, and coordinates a number of mobile industry technology initiatives, including 5G, AI, pardon me, and IoT in the region. I've done what I usually don't do and actually given you the bios. You have bios have been sent out and you can access these on the website. But one of the reasons I wanted to do that is we're coming at this from quite a diverse range of perspectives and strengths and expertise that are brought to this. Pardon me. I'm not going to waste too much time because we have a lot of ground to cover and we have 4 speakers. And each of them are going to raise a number of points here. What I do want to flag is the framing of this and how different 5G really is. There are 4 issues that I'm hoping that we're going to use these speakers and leverage the expertise and strengths of these speakers to be able to cover. The first is this issue around 5G and what is required and what can be seen as the 5G networks are now rolling out across the region. What do we need to understand about 5G and what is different? And as it's being rolled out, what are we already seeing? How's it being deployed? Secondly, in this emerging brave new world that we're coming into as we move into a post-pandemic environment, hopefully, of ubiquitous connectivity, what are the use cases? This has been the big question for a long time. What are we seeing already? And what should we see? What can we expect to see? The third issue, how do we use 5G, particularly as we now pivot, given the experiences of the pandemic, given the recognition by governments of the importance of getting everybody onto the network, of making sure we're now driving not only the connectivity piece, but the accessibility and the affordability pieces. We now recognize fundamentally how important it is to get everyone onto the networks. How are we making sure we're driving inclusivity? And inclusivity from issues around gender and diversity, disability, but also inclusivity in terms of innovation, SMEs and enterprises across the economy. How are we making sure we're driving all of those use case opportunities? And then finally, the standards issue. As we mentioned, this is part of the digital trade standards work that's being done. 5G is one of those areas that's captured a lot of attention because of the standardization issues. So how important is the standards issue? What standards are we looking at? and what are we seeing come forward? How important should we be looking at these issues? It's a wide range of issues that I'm hoping that the speakers will touch on, but as I flagged, they come from quite a diverse and rich area of expertise. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the four speakers to give a few minutes of their initial thoughts or presentation, and then we'll tie that together and begin to move into a Q&A session. So please do note any questions down, and we'll then come back to these after each of the speakers has had a chance to give their thoughts. I'll run through the order almost in the same order that was flagged in the program. We'll ask to hear from Manish first, move on to Fuad. I think we will then ask David to give his thoughts, and then we'll finish up with Shannon, who has some terrific case studies that we'd like to use as a segue into the Q&A session. So with that, Manish, can I hand over to you for your initial thoughts around this area, particularly on that whole infrastructure access and enablement piece?
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manish Kasliwal, and I represent American Tower, which is world's largest REIT. I'm based in Singapore and been with American Tower now for more than 6 years. But I'm very happy to be here with you all and talking to you on this subject, which is a very, very interesting subject. And as we, as a passive infrastructure provider, we are moving on to this journey. We are learning, we are getting new perspectives every single day. We talk to our customers, we talk to our ecosystem partners. So I'd like to share some of those things with you. But before I do that, I'd like to thank Australia APEC initiative and the Access Partnership for having ATC as one of the speakers here on this forum today. Peter, this is definitely a very exciting time, from a 5G transformation perspective, as you were saying. Faster speeds, higher bandwidth, everyone watching TV now on their mobile. These are different times, right? But one thing that has not changed since 1982, when 1G was launched, and today we are almost 30 years later, we are talking about 5G, is that the underlying infrastructure that supports the mobile connectivity for billions of people around the world, right? Is the towers and the macros, and we have that unique vantage point from which to observe these developments. These macro towers have been the backbone of network deployment since the advent of wireless communication, right? And whether it is 1G, 4G, 3G, 5G, they continue to be here and they continue to play a very, very important role. So I'll go through our slide deck. I'll introduce American Tower, what we do. Not a sales pitch, we don't do that typically, but just to give you an idea of how do we look at the network, the way it is evolving as a passive provider, passive infra provider, or a digital infra co-provider, right? So if I can please ask Kevin to share the slide deck, please. Yeah, thank you. If you move to the first slide, this just gives you a quick overview of who we are. We were founded in 1995, so almost 26 years back. We are world's largest REIT, with presence in 25 countries now. And, we basically, we own, we operate, we develop multi-tenant communication real estate across the world. We have 214,000 communication sites across the globe, out of which roughly 45,000 are in the US and about 76,000 are in India. But we are present pretty much everywhere. If you look at our mission statement, basically we make wireless communication possible everywhere. And I think that's a very, very important vision that we have, and we live that through every day, every moment of our corporate life. The way we expand our business, the way we grow our business, when we talk to our customers, whatever ways we can, we want to make sure that wireless communication is possible, right? And every nook and corner of this world that we're living in. Next slide, please. very quick journey of how we have evolved. I mean, I'll not go through this, but basically we have grown through acquisitions and organic always across the globe. Recently in Asia, we opened up 2 more countries, Philippines and Bangladesh. Next slide, please. A quick recap of what I said earlier, 25 countries we're present in. We are offering tower services, across the globe with a market cap of $125 billion plus. And then in addition to that, we also have other assets on the ground in US and in other international markets, which includes data centers, and in-building solutions. Next, please. What is important to note here is, as a passive infra, how do we create value for our customers, right? And we basically come in with a solution. We offer the land, we build the tower for our customers. We basically lease the place or own the place. We build new sites, new towers, taking into account the design standards, the wind speeds, and loading factors, everything, right? We bring in our capital. And then what we offer to our end customers is, basically we help them spend their, capital spend, right? I mean, they can save significant amount on that capital spend, right? A lot of issues on the uptime side that they have to face on their own today. And this is something that we help them with, right? We take that ownership on with us. We help them on the power side. I mean, all these countries that we are getting into, not every country has power availability, right? So we also take care on the diesel consumption, on providing them batteries and whatnot. So, the bottom line is we create value and we drive efficiencies in the overall network. Next slide, please. Now, where we see this entire architecture moving towards is towards how it's represented here in this diagram. I mean, there is a convergence of access which is taking place. Wired and wireless network are talking, and they started talking, and I believe David is going to be talking about that later today in the session. The virtualization is taking place. Everything is in the cloud now. A lot of data is there, and we need fast access to the data. And then at the same time, we need to process a lot of this data in real time. So, we are moving towards edge computing, where the data centers in its miniature form are shifting from hyperscale to a small megawatt or in kilowatt space, right at the where the towers are available. And then on top of this, we need to provide ubiquitous 5G services to everyone, right? So combining all these things, which is the wireless connectivity, the transport part, the compute part, this is where the entire architecture is heading towards. And we as a tower co are also evolving in that space. We were talking about 1G, 2G, 3G evolution, but at the same time, I think even as a tower co, we are moving, we are evolving, and we have to sort of adapt to the changing world, where we are not just providing a simple tower and concrete and O&M services, but we offer something much more than and beyond that, right? Next slide, please. So this is a very interesting slide I wanted to share with the audience here. On the left side, what you see is a typical 4G macro site, where you have your radio unit and then a fiberized, and then your DU/CU is connected through the fiber there. But as we unfold this and we move towards the 5G architecture, we are segregating DU and CU. We are basically, as the cloud RAN evolves, basically some of these components, some of these things will move towards the MEC hub, right? And the DU stays at where the tower is, but then the CU element moves towards what we call as the edge data center, and that's where, which can be miles away, which can be some few kilometers away from the tower. But this is how we are going to change the. We are seeing that the architecture will be changing, and as a tower co, or as a digital infra co, we'll be working now with operators to provide them solutions, looking something along this direction. Next slide, please. This is more about in-building solutions. Again, very important part where how we see the world evolving. And with 5G coming in, densification will be taking place. We need connectivity in buildings, which is where I think a lot of problems are today. And the way, I mean, our lifestyle is evolving, we all working from home or sort of, in closed environments. I mean, we need connectivity everywhere, proper connectivity everywhere. In-building solutions is again going to play a very important role as we move forward. Next, please. Again, last, one more slide I have after this one, but very important part. And again, Peter, I think one of the questions later or issues is how do we make sure that when we are working on this 5G, we are inclusive, right? And I think there are a couple areas where we want to touch upon this. One is the power part. A lot of this world is still not fully connected. There are power supplies available, but it's intermittent. I mean, sometimes it is on, sometimes it's off, or there are stretches when the power is not available. How can we sort of resolve that? How can we address that problem? Because if the power is not available, your site is not up and running, and hence the connectivity is not there, and it defeats the entire purpose. So we as an InfraCo, we are also working very closely on this front, doing a lot of innovation. I mean, whether it is on the renewable side or at the battery level, lithium-ion battery or a hybrid solution, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And then obviously, I mean, the last part is providing the entire operation and maintenance. So if you look at, the story I wanted to sort of share here with everyone is that in this 5G network that is evolving, and we are looking at the InfraCos or passive tower companies like ours, we play a very important role in bringing, a seamless experience connectivity to our end users, right? It's about low latency, it's about higher bandwidth, it's about faster speeds, and at the end of the day, we want to make it possible everywhere. So I just want to park myself here and leave a thought that that in this entire journey, we as InfraCo, we do play a very, very important role, and we work very closely with our customers and other ecosystem players to make this technology happen. Thank you.
Manish, thank you very much for that. It's a good way to start. As we work up from the infrastructure and we start moving upwards into the applications, this is obviously the right place to start. How far along the journey are Asian economies around us right now in terms of the way I did it, the two-pronged thing, in terms of the tower usage, but thinking more broadly, the shared infrastructure piece, because this is what we're effectively talking about here, making sure that you're really clear on the investment going in and the return on the investment that'll come out of it, generating that value. How well progressed are Asian economies in terms of the consolidation of tower assets and tower usage? And how much more work do you see there to do? I mean, given that you're here, I assume ATC sees a big opportunity here. How much work is there yet to do?
Excellent question, Peter. And I think, I mean, if I have to look at Asia, I cannot paint entire Asia by a single brush stroke, right? I mean, I classify Asia into two categories: developed countries and developing countries. And they both have different styles and requirements. So if I look at developed countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, right? I mean, they're all way ahead in their journey. They have started deploying 5G. They've started talking about sharing to a certain degree. Obviously Japan, Singapore is still a long way. I mean, none of the operators do sharing here right now. But at least in Australia, the momentum is there now. And recently, a couple of deals, on the tower side, where both the operators Telstra as well as Optus have decided to monetize their tower assets, right? And then basically now they will be available with a tower co who can then, or independent tower cos who can then share it with other operators or other service providers, right? So we see that trend, in developed countries catching up now. It's slow, but it is catching up. But in developing countries, I mean, it is quite interesting. It is different, and they definitely see a need for sharing. You pick up any country, whether it is Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh, India. I mean, you go there and they understand the importance of sharing. Yes, it took us a lot of time to convince the regulator the benefits of sharing, but now they have latched onto it. They do realize that there is no point in deploying multiple tower assets, when we can share them, right? But on the other side, they are lagging behind on the 5G front, right? So they're still working on the 4G, deploying 4G networks, but they are well ahead, if I may say that way, on the sharing aspect. So very interesting dynamics, when you look at Asia from those two angles, Peter.
Is that a leapfrog opportunity, Manish? I mean, the phrase is well overused and become a hoary cliche, but given that the shared infrastructure mindset is there and we have the regulatory framework in place, the ability for the Asian economies right now, particularly in our neighbourhood, to really latch on to and drive out 5G growth and with it ubiquitous connectivity is that a leapfrog opportunity?
It is, Peter, but there are a couple areas where we need to work on. So one, definitely, I think the spectrum is one issue. Availability of spectrum. I think a lot of countries are still working on it, and the work is in progress, I should say. So, but I think by 25 or so, 24, 25, I think most of the Asia should be in a position with 5G launched everywhere, right? But more than that, I think it is also about handset availability, right? Yep. And the price points at which 5G services will be available. And I think that is something that we need to work towards to make sure that 5G does not become only for well-to-do people, right? And then the people who are living on the coastal areas or the rural side of the country, they continue to use 3G or 4G in whatever shape and form it is today, and not seeing the true benefit of what 5G can offer to them. So I would say it is still a long way to go, but I think we have definitely started in the right direction. Okay,
thank you very much. It's a good way to start. Let's pick up the pace and we'll start moving through these initial presentations and interventions very quickly. Move straight away to Fuad. Fuad, let me hand the floor over to you, and I think you're going to take us a little bit up the stack.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Manish, for sharing some of the essentials that are absolutely important. As in Bell Labs, as you might know, I don't have slides, by the way, so I'm going to reflect a little bit and share some of my perspective. In Bell Labs, we tend to think a little bit into the future. And as you know, Bell Labs is a pretty renowned innovation research arm who's looking at the promise of technology and creating new technology 10 years out. And my team essentially get inspiration from that and think about the economic, social, societal impact of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, from that perspective, to think about this topic of inclusivity that you mentioned, Peter, is why I think 5G is a core instrument for driving inclusive growth. And what is really important is that, in my view, and we have put a paper out early this year, that's called A Big Inversion, that talks about this, that in order for us to drive towards inclusivity, inclusive growth, the world has to invert with a big I. And let me explain what I mean by that is. So if you bear with me a little bit, I need to take you a little bit in time in history to understand a few things that are really core and essential from a policy and economic perspective in terms of value creation and how can we value democratize in the future. So I'll take you through a few episodes of the past, the present, and the future. So if I take you a little bit back in the time of the first and the second industrial revolution, it was a time of amazing change, because what happened, the world at that point built physical networks. I give you an example of the US, and the data applies globally as well, is that we built we built physical networks, transportation network, electricity networks, communication networks, health networks. And we saw that up until the point from in 1950s, we had the highest productivity growth rate that we achieved as a nation and even globally as well. And the promise of building those physical infrastructures was because they all diffused to a certain point, and then they created an aggregation effect, a network effect that spurred local economies and drew a lot of productivity, economic gains, and job creation. But then as we move from 1950s onwards into the so-called the third industrial revolution, or the time of the internet age, we built intelligent infrastructures, we put investments in ICT and what have you, but we got a little bit distracted because the model shifted to a lot of consumerism. I almost call it the selfie age. So we were a little bit distracted with trivial entertainment, and nobody can say that we have actually moved the needle in terms of productivity, social, economic gains. And in fact, productivity growth rates had declined almost 1/3 what used to be in the last 50 years. And that's alarming. So while we were struggling with that, we in Bell Labs have been vigorously calling out a dichotomy that was existing between digital mature industries and these physical industries. That digital mature industries, which represent 30% of the world GDP, received 70% of the investments. And the larger part, which imports 75% of the workforce, contributed 70% of the world GDP, only received 30%. So while we were at it, guess what happened? COVID came. And as COVID came, we said, oh my God, we had to pivot. And that 30% sector where it received 70%, thankfully, allowed us to keep our head above water. Look at what happened with e-commerce. It shot up dramatically. We were able to go and purchase things. What didn't happen in the last 6 years happened in 6 months. Telehealth, e-learning, remote working, all of that allowed us to keep afloat. But that also further amplified the point that we only invested in that sector, while the larger sector hasn't received that investment. So what now, if we look where things are going with 5G, and I call it the 5G plus, and explain that because 5G is that central glue, if you will, that allows different industries to be augmented and digitalized, if you will. So the inversion that I talk about, that 70-30 ratio that we have been contending with, we have predicted and modeled that these physical industries, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, logistics, transportation, they will have to be augmented and with the underlying technologies, which are 5G plus, and that will invert the ratio of this investment from 70-30 to 35-65 in 10 years. So 65% of all ICT investments will go into these sectors, and 75% of that investments will be 5G plus enabled. So it is going to be a massively transformational effort in trying to spur local economy. So that's the macro imperative. It's very important for policymakers, economists, and decision makers to think about that. Now, while I put this macro perspective and the imperative, let's also reflect a little bit about why I think that 5G is such an interesting instrument to actually enable this inversion and this augmentation of these industries. So as Manish and others talked about and will talk about, 5G is a transformational shift how we have designed networks in the past. And once we understand that, the idea of inclusivity will also come clear to in our mind. In the past, we have largely built networks which were centralized, clouds that were thousands of kilometers away, which were a little bit in how the services were then delivered. But the nature of a 5G network itself is very local and very distributed in the sense. So if we even forget the geopolitics and the geoeconomics and only think about the physics that is driving the creation of 5G networks, we will know the answer. And what I mean is that if you look at the speed of light, it can only travel 100 kilometers and back in 1 millisecond. And some of these industries that I talk about, which are inherently local, whether it's manufacturing, a factory, or a farm, or what have you, some of the new advanced use cases that we predict in the next 5 to 10 years will require extreme low latency, reliability, and security. And for that, you have to build distributed, localized networks, which are proximate to you, 30 to 50 kilometers away. So imagine a future in the next 5 to 10 years where you have these edge clouds in every city parameter, every district, if you will, to service the needs of these industries and enterprises. And that inversion will draw this investment. That's an important point about decentralization and localization effect of 5G. The second thing that I would also call out is in the standards, we are now talking about the local setup, of course, the distributed architecture, but the openness concept. So this layered architecture of 5G that we will be building and advancing, we are now coming together and think about an open ecosystem. And what that means is it will propel and fuel new investments by new startups. If you were not traditionally playing in the 5G space, you can actually start to play in that space. Give you one example, in Korea, there are almost 100 plus SMEs who are now developing 5G applications, leveraging some of their investments that has been made in 5G networks. So the ecosystem is expanding, and you can actually drive a lot of that innovation. So the network, devices, and application will co-reside at the edge where the action is, become very proximate, And so the future applications that you would have to build will be tightly integrated to the network. And that is going to open up a new opportunity because 5G network will have to offer itself up as a platform. No application provider can reasonably process and program the underlying infrastructure. So you have to expose the power of the network as a platform, as a service model, which is then going to make it easier for consumption as well. And that lowers the barrier to entry. So I wanted to make those points to understand the larger imperative, but at the same time, understand the instrument that is 5G and associated technologies, edge clouds, analytics, security systems, and what have you, because all of that intelligence collapses into a stack that is close 50 kilometers away from you where the action is. So by nature, you have to distribute, you have to make local economies work. And once you do that inversion of that 70% industries, it will create a lot of job growth. I think World Bank even predicts that there will be 140 million more jobs that can be created if you start to connect 75% of developing nations. And in our own estimate, we talk about the work of the future. We believe 70% of future jobs will change, and we call it the new collar jobs that will be at the back of augmentation of these industries in a local level. So huge opportunity that 5G brings. One can obviously, somebody can say 5G is a new flavor of wireless technology. Yes, but it works in a way that drives transformation across multiple domains, as I have alluded to, from a macroeconomic imperative to the instrumentation of how technology works, to creation of new jobs in terms of how some of these industries needs to drive. And the last point before I wrap up, that what 5G and associated technology does, it creates a new economic value formula that is based on three things. Once you deploy this distributed local architecture of 5G, you're going to drive new productivity, safety, efficiency, and resiliency in your enterprises and local industries. That's number one. More profit for those enterprises. Secondly, you're going to reskill and hyper-localize and augment the workers, and therefore they can acquire new skills because you're going to humanly augment them with the use of 5G networks. And I'll give some examples later on in the discussion on manufacturing and others, how we are enabling workers. And the third piece of the economic equation is going to be around new revenues for government as well. So if you triangulate this in our modeling, what we have estimated for ASEAN countries, by 2030, we predict and we estimate that it could have an impact almost around $283 billion of contribution to GDP if it is done right. But that all comes down to the pace of adoption, lowering the barrier to entry. So this promise is there. Can we pull it up by incentivizing the rollout and faster adoption? So I'll stop there. I probably have said a lot of things, but hopefully it makes some sense, because I wanted to give you that end-to-end perspective in a more expansive sense, because it has transformational economic, social context to it, and then drives inclusivity and equalization as well in terms of different economies playing in this new competitive landscape that we call the next generation.
Fahd, thank you very much. There's a lot there, so thank you, and you've covered it very articulately in quite a short time. I appreciate that. Before I move on to David, and I know we'll come back to a number of these points, but I wouldn't mind just digging into a couple just quickly if we can. The open ecosystem that you refer to, your example was, and I think I understood where you were going with this and the importance of it, but your example was 100+ Korean SMEs developing and deploying 5G apps, if I got that correct. How is that different from what we've seen before? What's the difference there?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the past generation of the networks, we have, as you probably heard a number of times, the telco community and others who've invested in 4G networks complained that somebody ate our lunch. The over-the-top came and they sort of, we invested in. Frankly, we've heard that ad nauseum now. So what has happened is, in fact, there's an over the top, but there is a guy sitting on the panel, our friend Manish, who is the under the bottom, who is also coming actually from his side. But the interesting thing is the following. The 5G network is a layered architecture. So you virtualize the network, you then use your cloud network functions in a tightly integrated manner in an edge cloud instance. And then you have very tightly integrated services that uses the underlying power of the network. That in itself gives some additional power and promise to expose new APIs to the application community, which wasn't possible before. So now you can use a lot of these advanced underlying capabilities of low latency, reliability, security, location, what have you, and then the application community can come in and develop new applications on top of that. So as I mentioned, the next game will be creating and exposing the power of this network through what we call network as a service. And that has different business model, commercial connotation, but also allows application providers to then participate in this ecosystem. And we see a rise of new startups as well.
Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to come back to this. $283 billion of additional GDP by 2030 for the ASEAN member states. Did I get that correct?
283 billion contribution to GDP in 2030 if we had a certain rate of adoption, pace of adoption, and that inversion that I talk about, that happens. And I'm happy to share the paper, which you can circulate amongst the attendees, because it tells you the full story. The paper name is called The Big Inversion.
Excellent. And sorry, where I was leading to with this, 140 million new jobs, which was the World Bank figure. Given the picture you're portraying, do we know what those jobs are, and are we well prepared for them? Yeah,
we're not well prepared per se for that, because I think what will happen is that we have to put in some programs around reskilling, and many organizations, enterprises, private and public sectors are now recognizing the need for that. But what is also interesting is, as we develop these advanced technologies, there's a concept of human augmentation that is coming forward as well. So in our thinking, what also is happening, we might have a nice, happy coincidence of sort, whereby as we develop the framework for people to develop and work with augmented tools and simulation systems and software, the power of the networks in the future will augment people's skills as well. So for example, if you are not somebody who's trained on a factory floor, you can actually still work with augmented simulation tools that will help you perform a task, because what will happen is, you imagine, Peter, you're wearing some sort of advanced goggle, and there are real-time instructions coming around how to go and navigate. That completely opens the paradigm of the kind of work people do, who can get involved, gender or no gender, what have you. It completely opens the gate for you. And we can talk a little bit more about our own experience in our Nokia factories as well. So definitely the job nature will change, and that's why the nature will be highly augmented by the network, psychological augmentation, physical augmentation, cognitive augmentation, so we can extend our senses beyond what it is today.
If you can help me augment the damn hip that I had to go off and get the painkillers for in our
absolutely exoskeletons. You need some exoskeletons to help you with that.
Absolutely. David, we're going to transition to you. I want it called out that it wasn't me who set Fuad up to call out the whining telcos who are complaining about the over-the-top seating. That would have been your friend John Ewer over there. He undoubtedly set Fuad up for that one as the segue in. But it is a good segue. So let's hand over to David, and let's hear from GSMA's perspective on these issues.
Thanks. I'm David Turkington from GSMA. We're the Global Association of Mobile Operators, and we run the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. That's our main event, which hasn't been what it used to be the last couple of years due to things beyond our control. I'm trying not to say the C word in this presentation, but here goes. Let me just give you a little, try and share a part of my screen so I can just give you a little bit of a talk about GSMA. In Asia Pacific, we have somewhere around 1.6 billion mobile connections. These are subscribers, that is, and we have mobile internet users, sorry, 1.2 billion. So you can see that even though we have users, we don't necessarily have internet users or internet enabled phones. There's quite a lot of SIM connections because a lot of people have multiple SIMs and sometimes multiple phones, for example, myself. So that number is bigger than the number of subscribers. We mentioned operator revenues here as 217 billion, and that's predicted to rise to 230 billion. and the number of connections that are 4G and ultimately 5G smartphones, for example, is 68% at the moment, predicted to rise to 83% as the prices come down and it becomes more standardized and so on. Sorry, 1 second. And in 5G, we have 429 million connections predicted in 2025. Currently, it's about 14%. And I think Manish mentioned earlier about handset availability, and this is one of the things that's actually quite interesting, because 5G is different to the previous generations in that the chicken has come before the egg in this case. The handsets that support 5G are in the network already in a lot of places. And in fact, this is one of the things that's driving the operators to upgrade towards 5G, particularly in India. So that was just an interesting factlet there. So Internet of Things, of course, is 1.8 billion devices. And I won't get into arguments about how much we're going to contribute to GDP, but this is somebody else's figure, and I won't draw a line around it. Oh, sorry, wrong one. So let me just go back to the presentation. Sorry, myself. There we go. Sorry. So GSMA is interested in all of this stuff, and of course, and one of the things that or several of the things that were mentioned ahead of time, I have the advantage of going towards the end, so I get to comment on other people's presentations. But so if you indulge me for a moment. So Manish mentioned about spectrum. This is something GSMA is heavily involved in both in the region and globally, of course. Promoting standardization, which was another comment made, and essentially standardization drives the mobile business forward. So, for example, in the beginning, it was the standardization of mobile phones that was able to drive the economies of scale, and this reduced the price, allowed users to be able to afford them, because there's more technology in your smartphone than NASA had, just a few years ago. So this is really tremendous stuff, and really only becomes possible due to the standardization. Similarly, spectrum, whenever it's standardized and the same frequency bands are allocated across the world in different countries, this allows the same phone to be used and sold and developed. So develop once and sell multiple times. And again, this is very important towards achieving economies of scale and reducing the price. And just makes it easier to make phones. In my past life, I would design radio systems, and I'm absolutely astounded how they can put so many frequency bands in a phone these days. It's just amazing. So one of the other comments made was about network slicing. And this is sort of something GSMA is working on with the operator platform. And this is essentially an effort to bring the cloud close to the operator, or so you can take advantage of these low latency systems and solutions and applications. So for example, AI recognition, so you can have the processing in the cloud, but it's very short latency from your phone camera to the cloud, or that's for a device for a consumer. But on an industrial scale, you could have machine vision in a factory, detecting something wrong on the production line and so on. And this is the sort of thing that we can talk about a bit later. But operator platform and network slicing addresses or tries to address this sort of situation, where we bring the processing from the data center that's thousands of kilometers away to somewhere near the user. In Korea, as mentioned, hundreds of developers. One of the applications that they use this for is in stadiums, where they broadcast virtual reality of the event that's going on. They can take the cameras from multiple positions, insert graphics in, and then broadcast it to everyone on 5G. So these are the very interesting and exciting times that we're living through. And one of the examples I like to give is, Steve Jobs, whenever he introduced the iPhone, he didn't foresee, Uber becoming the biggest taxi firm in the world or Airbnb becoming the biggest hotel group. And I think this is the same with 5G. We can't necessarily predict what's going to happen, but I think we've unleashed something that's going to be very useful to everyone. And just to go back about the developers, and I think you mentioned, Peter, about haven't we seen this before? To a certain extent, we have. We've had app developers. The designer of Flappy Birds, just a simple game. He was in Vietnam, and so I think this is democratizing the development, and ultimately it will enrich small developers and big developers alike. So I think we live through exciting times, and with that, I'll hand over to or Shannon. I don't see on my list at the top. So, are back to you, Peter, for now.
I think Shannon's still there, and she's going to pop up any second. But before I do hand over to the power that is Shannon, I like the operator revenue figure of 217 billion to 230 billion, if I picked up on that from your slide correctly, which suggests that they're not the operators aren't doing too badly after all through this period. But we can pick up on that if we need to. The issue that I was interested in, you directly presented several I think, but one answer to how is 5G different, or if it's really different, in that this time around the devices were ready beforehand, the chicken before the egg. I guess I'd just like to gently challenge that and ask if they are. When I think about 5G, and I'll pick up on some of Fuad's examples, I think you've got two answers. I think we had the phones to a degree, although I think there's lots of question marks about the early rollouts and the device. If they're really going to do what 5G enables them for, to your point of we live in exciting times and it's hard to predict what's coming. The IoT example is one that we've all latched onto and we like to cite. But if I use some of Fuad's examples and what we seem to be struggling with in this leap forward, the virtual glasses, the AR and the VR augmentation stuff, the cars, the self-driving, the autonomous, or even if we don't have to go to Steve Jobs level territory with the cars, even if there's a degree of autonomy within the cars, those devices aren't ready yet, it seems to me. And so that impact of where we're really situating 5G for. I know Shannon's going to talk about the smart city, so I'm expecting she's going to back your point up to some extent. I guess I'd like to just gently challenge it a little bit. So,
well, first of all, cars, and we hear a lot about autonomous cars and 5G. I'm not a, well, my observation is it's not a very autonomous car if it needs a 10 megabit link to drive. That will be a long time in coming. But certainly for perhaps AI, assisted, for example, you've got the Tesla cars and they have some sort of recognition. So I'm sure there's sort of neural network downloads that need to be sent to those, and that'll be the sort of thing offline. I don't think it'll be necessarily used to drive the car in situ. Of course, there's talk about V2X, vehicle to anything, and these will need to be fast and so on. Wi-Fi 6 is also in the mix for that, and I think that still remains to be seen how that's all going to play out. I think that mobile operators would be very greedy if they expected all the cars to have to run through their network, and I'll be going out and buying a 30-year-old Land Rover if that's the case. So, but and to back to your other point about IoT and VR and so on. Yeah, we hear a lot about that, but I think the more interesting things will be on the industrial type applications that I think Fuad mentioned. And because whenever you have wireless everything, then you can reconfigure your factory or your situation or the monitoring as need be. And I think this is going to be where it's all going to be at.
Can I make a quick 30-second comment, David?
Please.
Yeah, so I think I think we all have to probably recognize that 5G is going through different stages at the moment. So we've had this rush around everybody announcing I've launched 5G. Again, what we did was we launched enhanced mobile broadband, and we still try to offer same thing with better speeds, etc., with different pricing or not for consumers. What we are now getting at is this infrastructure, this distributed architecture is going to be massively important for multiple different reasons. Enterprise, industrials. You also talk a lot about, and here, in fact, I was speaking to Bloomberg about this topic of metaverse, where we are now trying to create digital replica of our physical worlds. Everything that we do, trade, transactions, businesses are going to set up, and that requires a complete different teleportation experience, immersive experience in that sphere. So I think we are just getting started. And I think it's really important for economies and countries to understand why they want to prioritize investments so that their competitiveness on the global stage could be protected now, versus it's the same old mindset around incremental growth, but think about future and then define your strategies from now on to that future, how to get there. So that's just a little bit my 2 cents on that.
I'm going to ask David if he wants to respond once we've shifted to Shannon. I think we're opening up a lot of interesting points that are going to have some perspectives to them. But in the interest of time, let me move across to Shannon, then I'm going to come back. I know David will have some responses. I do. I actually want to challenge some of the points because I think we actually want to dig into some of these opportunities. But Shannon, let me move across to you now. Do you want to take us through some of what we're looking at in terms of smart city development?
Yeah, sure. So I'm coming from a different angle in terms of this. So I'm CEO of a company called 5G Catalyst Technologies. What we do is we integrate 5G into our IoT solutions for various different parties. Number one being smart cities. Number two being industrials, which include in manufacturers as well as industrial parks. And then the third one is healthcare, whether it be hospitals and or field hospitals, which is the C word that has brought down that in Southeast Asia. Anyway, so for the purpose of today, right now, I will talk about mostly smart cities because it is the touch that gets to the end user. The way that we actually operate is that we go to the pain point of the city. We do know that we do know that digitization of the economy is going to boost up the economy in many different ways. Our biggest pain point is usually to create the awareness and really talk to village mayors and cities and different people in the government to actually convey of how this is beneficial to one's life and how the quality of life will improve in what way, how this would help the civil servant and government agencies improve in their data flow or workflow and whatnot. So that's the bulk of my job. But when I do that, we basically go to, smart city, a city that wants to be a smart city one. We talk about the different pain points. And then from that, we map it to the IoT solutions that we have, as well as some of the, global partners that we use, such as Cisco, Mavenir, a bunch of other solutions across the world. We map it to our own platform. And then we also work with the telcos in Thailand to actually provide whatever spectrum that would be. It's not necessarily all 5G. It is actually, we do understand that, in the place that we are at right now, CPEs are still really expensive. The radios are still a little bit more expensive. So we're trying to make sure that the budget also matches the use case. So we do a little combination between 5G, 4G, LoRa, or whatever, the use case is needed. We focus on, again, the solution and problem we're trying to solve and who we're trying to help. So I know that's a lot of words, so I thought that I'd just show you a video. This is a video of, so we launched Thailand's first 5G end-to-end smart city in Thailand. It's about 3.5 minutes, so bear with me. And it's in Thai, but there are English subtitles. So maybe Gareth, if you could play that, perfect. And go ahead.
สวัสดีค่ะดิฉันซีฉัตรปวีค่ะและวันนี้จะขอพาทุกคนก้าวเข้าสู่โลกอนาคต เริ่มต้นที่อำเภอบ้านฉางจังหวัดระยองแห่งนี้ถือว่าที่นี่น่าตื่นเต้นมากๆเพราะว่าเป็นโครงการต้นแบบนำร่องแห่งแรกของประเทศไทยที่ใช้ 5G มาเนรมิตเมืองให้เป็น Smart City แบบเต็มรูปแบบโครงการนำร่องทดสอบระบบ 5G ที่บ้านฉางเกิดจากความร่วมมือของ EEC บริษัทโทรคมนาคมแห่งชาติรวมไปถึงพันธมิตรที่เกี่ยวข้องซึ่งมีความตั้งใจนำเทคโนโลยีทั้งใหม่และก็ดีมาให้กับคนเมืองได้ทดลองใช้เพื่อเพิ่มคุณภาพชีวิตบ้านฉางมีความพิเศษเพราะตั้งอยู่ระหว่างนิคมอุตสาหกรรมท่าเรือมาบตาพุธและสนามบินอุตภาวซึ่งเป็นพื้นที่พัฒนาเศรษฐกิจสำคัญที่จะสร้างมูลค่าการส่งออกถึง 80% และรองรับแรงงาน1 ใน 4ของประเทศไทยรัฐและเอกชนจึงต้องเข้ามาพัฒนาพื้นที่ให้พร้อมด้วยการสร้างชุมชนปลอดภัยสิ่งแวดล้อมชุมชนยั่งยืนบริการด้านสาธารณสุขและระบบสาธารณะเพื่อการท่องเที่ยวในชุมชนด้วยเทคโนโลยี 5G และอุปกรณ์ IoT อัจฉริยะต่างๆและด้านหลังซีนี้นะคะคือเสาอัจฉริยะที่รวบรวมข้อมูลต่างๆที่สำคัญนะคะหนึ่งในตัวอย่างของอุปกรณ์ในการเก็บข้อมูลนั่นก็คือเซ็นเซอร์ในการวัดสภาพอากาศเมื่อใดก็ตามที่วัดสภาพอากาศเสร็จแล้วมีข้อมูลขึ้นมาก็จะส่งข้อมูลเหล่านั้นไปที่หน่วยงานภาครัฐเอกชนและหน่วยงานที่เกี่ยวข้องเข้ามาดูแลเมื่อสภาพอากาศนั้นผิดปกติค่ะหากคุณประสบเหตุร้ายอันตรายลื่นล้มพบเห็นอุบัติเหตุแค่กดปุ่มส่งสัญญาณ SOS จากเสาอัจฉริยะต้นนี้เจ้าหน้าที่จะช่วยเหลือทันทีโดยการสังเกตการผ่านกล้องรักษาความปลอดภัยและสื่อสารผ่านระบบกระจายเสียงที่ถูกติดตั้งไว้ตามเสา 5G ก่อนที่จะเข้าไปที่จุดเกิดเหตุในปัจจุบันนี้กล้อง AI สามารถรับส่งข้อมูลมหาศาลได้เร็วกับพริบตาซึ่งก็จะช่วยเจ้าหน้าที่ตำรวจตามหาคนร้ายหรืออาชญากรได้อย่างง่ายดายค่ะด้านหลังนี้นะคะคือห้องควบคุมที่มีเจ้าหน้าที่จะมาคอยดูแลตลอด 24 ชั่วโมงผลัดเปลี่ยนหมุนเวียนกันไปค่ะโดยภาพที่ขึ้นนี้มาจากเทคโนโลยีโดรนไร้คนขับที่คอยลาดตระเวนบริเวณชายหาดและบริเวณท่าเรือจอดซ้อนคันมีคนลักลอบเข้าเมืองไปจนอุบัติเหตุที่เกิดขึ้นอย่างเรือคว่ำและเทคโนโลยีตัวโดรนตัวนี้ต้องพึ่งเทคโนโลยี 5G เท่านั้นเลยค่ะเพราะว่าข้อมูลนี้ทั้งใหญ่ทั้งสำคัญแล้วก็ต้องรวดเร็วทันใจด้วย 5G สามารถทำ private networkที่จะกักเก็บข้อมูลไว้ในฐานข้อมูลท้องถิ่นไม่รั่วไหลไปที่อื่นแอปพลิเคชันของเมืองที่เรากำลังพัฒนาจะช่วยคุณสามารถทำทุกอย่างที่เพิ่งพูดไปเมื่อสักครู่ได้ด้วยสมาร์ทโฟนเครื่องเดียว 5G คือคลื่นลูกใหม่ที่จะหล่อเลี้ยงชีวิตของเราให้ดียิ่งขึ้นไม่ว่าจะเป็นการทำงานจากที่บ้านอย่างมีประสิทธิภาพการค้าขายผ่านช่องทางการสื่อสารใหม่ๆหรือแม้แต่การหาหมอจากระยะไกลก็สามารถเป็นไปได้อย่างสะดวกรวดเร็วราบรื่นด้วยเทคโนโลยี 5G นี่แหละค่ะและนี่คือต้นแบบของเมือง 5G Smart City แห่งแรกของประเทศไทยที่เน้นเอาเทคโนโลยีต่างๆมาทำให้ชีวิตความเป็นอยู่ของประชาชนนั้นดียิ่งขึ้นอนาคตของประเทศไทยเริ่มต้นที่นี่บ้านฉาง 5G Smart City
That's the end of the presentation. So just a really quick recap on that one. The reason why we chose this specific city, so this city is located in the eastern economic corridor of Thailand. It's actually where it's probably the largest area where I think there's 22 industrial parks, 10,000 factories there, and it's approximately about 80% of total exports are manufactured there. All the automotives, electronics, petrochemical, everything is based there. And there's also 2 ports, one a deep sea port and another one which is, they're both deep sea ports actually. And then the other one is an airport as well. So that area is just really big for the industrial zone. The reason why we chose that one specifically was because, yes, we know all the benefits of how it would help the industries. But what happened for the longest time in the past 30 years, this hub has always created so many environmental factors for the citizens there. There are a lot of accidents, there's explosions, there's the port where there's actually illegal smuggling, terrorism, perhaps terrorism, they have to protect people that actually come on shore. And currently they're doing it manually. There's also the petrochemicals around there where they're not using any automation to date. And, with the dawn of COVID and everything, there was a need for all of this to be in that area. And so it all comes down to both, not just the SME and industrial side of things, but also how it impacts the citizens. So when we went in and talked to the mayor there and mapped out the pain points that they had, the main ones, again, were environmental. Second one is safety and surveillance. And the safety surveillance right now really provided tools and data for the mayor and the police station, as well as the health department there to actually work. I think you may have seen the command room inside that video. But that one really was a game changer for all of them, because at first, in Thailand, and I think the word smart city is just so vague. What does a smart city mean? And everywhere across the world, I mean, it took me like a while to get myself, and now I'm like in the thick of it. But in some smart cities across the world, it's just the energy side of things. Some smart cities are tourism related. For us, the reason why we call this smart city is because of the interoperability of the different types of platforms and the different types of data that is from the IoT as well as non-IoT. So in this essence, we have the environmental, we have the traffic and license plate management and facial recognition, also mapped to the regional and local data that they have provided. There are some issues that we have encountered, which is, how do you actually make this information much more dynamic? How do they actually link it up to like the regional and national data pools that are available? Today, we're not there yet. Today, we just in Ban Chang Rayong. And so for the mayor and the police officers and the health sanitation department to be linked in real time just really helped them. So they actually were mind blown, which is actually really cool, because we didn't have to prescribe them something that wasn't needed. Sometimes when I'm talking about 5G, I get the eyes rolling and they're like, why do we need a Ferrari when we actually just can use a Toyota? And so this is actually one of the case studies where we actually see it does, create an impact, for, providing data at fingertips of the people that it's needed. Then there's another set of data, a subset of this that's provided for the citizens as well on the app. So it might seem very basic, the package or the current solution that it is, but what it is it underlines the foundation of connecting all this data for people to use. Currently today, ever since we had that launch, and the Prime Minister has also touted it as the model prototype for the rest of the country, we did have some challenges in the beginning. One of the reasons that spurred why we were able to do this proof of concept and initial smart city was because the telecoms that had bid and won the auction last year specifically won 26 megahertz, the wave band. And it was really difficult for them to monetize it and figure out how to get to the, to make money from it, basically. So, of course, we know the mid-band and the mid-band is being used for the consumer cell phones. And everybody kind of knows, how to use and make money out of that today. And yes, they are having problems with trying to monetize 5G on the mid-band as well. Today, the reason why we were given such push and support with this one was because we specifically were looking at the 26 gigs and how it could help the economy recover, all the different aspects that it would touch on. And so we were able to work with the National Telecom telecom. It's the government telecom.
NTBC.
No, actually, so NBTC is the commission that regulates all of that. There's two telecom companies in Thailand, NT, which used to be called TOT, and then CT. So they merged. And so that's why basically they needed help with monetization. And they're like, you know what, we're used to selling cell phone plans. And of course, there are the giants like the True and the AIS and DTAC. Help us, get to the solution side of things, because that's not our core competence. That's where we actually came in. So with that support, we were able to do this POC, which again, created a little bit of funding for this, because the song and dance that I have kept on having to do in the last year is that, why do we need this now? I mean, I know that they got the concession last year, but is there really a market need? The CPEs are still really expensive. How does the citizen actually benefit from this? And again, these are some of the problems that I saw today. We have been working on more use cases to build out the stack for the smart cities. So we have, and specifically, how do we help the grassroots? And so specifically, we have case studies and POCs that are coming out that are agricultural related, that are healthcare, remote healthcare. There's like elderly care with remote. We have remote ultrasound use cases. We have the AR, VR glasses in terms of not just remote education, but also the ones in the industrial parks. The problem that I always get right now, and again, just to segment it out there, one is smart cities. Who's paying the bill? The cities themselves, which they haven't been able to drum up a case yet of why. So there's a ton of POCs that are starting to not flood yet, but starting to get into Thailand. And the problem is the POC is paid for, and then what happens after that? There is no sustainability. There's no one who's picking up the check. There is only one fund in Thailand that supports 5G right now. And so how do we actually, basically one of the big problems is people not understanding why we need it yet and who's going to fund it. And that's really, really the biggest problem we have. In terms of industrial, it's a little bit easier, but also starts with POC as well. They always want to see one, okay, safety, we understand, there's obviously the shift with COVID, how they don't want to have people, especially the petrochemical companies, they're moving to automation much quicker. So it's really the first tier industries, not the SMEs that can afford this type of investment. Then the other one is cost savings. So we actually have to go almost case by case to do a feasibility study with them in terms of, okay, you want to have replace your whole manpower, from a person driving a forklift to automated forklift. Then there's the whole issue about unions and then HR and the people that we're replacing. But these industrial factories do not actually have the inter-company protocol to actually roll out a new reskilling, upskilling. They have a layoff plan, but they don't have an upskilling, reskilling plan. So, these are kind of the challenges that we're seeing today. And maybe, maybe I'll leave it at that. And those are that's kind of what.
That's a very dramatic way to leave it, Shannon, freezing on the screen.
So those are some of the challenges that we see today.
There you go, she's back. Okay, when you say you're just going to leave it at that, I've got 3 pages of notes. Kevin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, just to let you know ahead of when we wrap this call, I'm now angry at you and Gareth again. You told me at least one of these speakers was going to be boring. I've got way too much to unpack in the short amount of time that we've had here. So let me just remind people that there's the chat bar if you want to put your questions up. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to monopolise the questions here. And to the question, John, you posed, you're not incognito. Everyone can see who's posing the question. So if you want to put in provocative stuff, we'll know who's provoking. Shannon, let me oversimplify so you can correct me. You're saying you had this spot on example. And here's the funny bit that I'm just confused bit with where you get me to. You're the one person who's got the dramatic POC. Everyone's referred to examples and convinced me we're right in the era of 5G. You're the one who's got the live POC, who run, not a POC, live example. You run out the smart city video, you tell us what's going on there, you've got the investment requirements and the use benefits. You've blown people's minds, you've got the numbers at your fingertips. But you're telling me as you come in that, if I'm hearing you correctly, we've still got a delta to where we need to get to. You're having to spend all your time convincing people that the there is there right now. You give the wonderful example of the 26 gig range. It seems to sound like the 3G story all over again. People went and had to invest huge amounts of money in the spectrum rights, and then they couldn't come up with the use cases. And now the use cases are coming in. You've created one for them. You're developing it. So that delta still seems to be there. Am I oversimplifying that we're in the same story again?
No, I mean, that plus enter all the big giants and competitors trying to come into this space. But yeah, but you're absolutely right. There's a big delta.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to try and keep the answers a little bit brief, and that's unfair on all of you because there's a lot of information here. But just I want to, before I leave Shannon, because there was a lot there. Am I right that the drones and if just picking up on the pretty snapshots I saw from parts of the video, in some of that stuff, the drones and the posts, they're the devices? I'm still stuck on David's point that we had the devices already. Are the drones and the posts the devices?
Yes, the drones are the devices. The ones that are expensive are the radios, the 5G core radios.
Oh, I know. We're still trying to pack them in. And I also, by David's point, that it's been an absolute revolution with what we're packing into these devices and these things these days. So this, I mean, I'm on both sides of that. I agree with both of you. But drones, the posts, and how many questions do you get about surveillance?
How many what?
Questions do you get about surveillance?
Whole privacy issue. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, but I mean, we don't want to be like China, but at the same time, we're trying to make sure that it's there to do its purpose. So some of the cities we're talking to will just do it where it's really dangerous and where there's usually no, police in sight. Like if it's a cliff, if it's a tourism, attraction, and then people take selfies and then fall off a cliff. So we try to do a middle ground where it's not everywhere, right?
How ready for your solution are we? I asked about the skill sets before. I got two very good answers from two of the speakers so far. And to my mind, they're the right answers. And we've got ASEAN officials on the call here. I've seen a number of them there. And it's a debate that's getting absolutely debated across ASEAN committees right now about how we prepare but how ready are we? I mean, I love the answer, the point that you're giving. You've targeted a place where there's been lots of accidents, there's been smuggling, there's the corruption issues, which are going to be, and this helps address these things. It's a very positive story overall. I'm not going to, people will throw surveillance in, but the story's positive. The bombing that happened in Thailand a few years ago, unfortunately from the dark side, was one of my favourite stories because we literally saw the bombers and we saw them take off down the main drag in Bangkok and then we couldn't find them. They were going down the main road in one of the more surveilled cities in the world, and it turns out that more than 70% of the cameras that were supposed to be there just weren't working, and they weren't working because people hadn't gone and fixed them because we knew they were broken and no one had got around to fixing them. Aren't we going to see a lot of that same human flaw and human error again with this new revolution?
We are, because, I was doing a site survey last week on one of the islands, and there's tons of cameras in this one area, but then they're all by private owners. And one of them even went to like the old village headsman's house, and he's not the village headsman anymore. And so there's a disconnect there. It's very fragmented. But I think that, the more this is where the government is supposed to come in, because like today, what we could have done to mitigate that problem with a bomber is that if that data was actually synced to, say, passport data, and again, there's a lot of privacy PDPA issues. I know, I'm not going to go into that right now. But
Good. Which brings me to the other point, and then I'll leave, because I want to go over to the others to have a chance to respond. But you talked about interoperability being the key, and it's lovely. Great message. You're interoperating between all of the various platforms, and this is why targeting an industrial-based city is a great way to go. How's the data sharing going? And you even gave a partial answer to that. We're locked into the city right now. It's not locked into what it could be doing. Good answer. But data sharing is hard. The interoperability, which we've all pushed for the last decade plus, is almost, it turns out in retrospect, the easy part. The data sharing is difficult. How's that going for you?
It's not going yet. I mean, there's been talks about a data lake and what do you call it?
Anonymized data and the data sharing, trust frameworks and everything. Yep.
Exactly. We haven't seen that yet. And I actually saw a name on the attendee list, and I think he's from the e-government. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. I too am trying to do some more research on this one, but today we haven't seen so much yet. I hope that is the way that we go, and it's up to the government to actually be able to do that.
John, if you're still there in the chat bar, you want to talk to Shannon and talk to her about the solution you've got on that front with Hong Kong. Fahd, can I come back to you just very quickly? Because that last point leverages onto one that I was really intrigued with your presentation. You're talking about the solutions out there, and you dropped it in the middle of one of the responses really quickly, and I thought it was the magic part, the APIs. That living ecosystem that we're growing out. I think we've got some nice examples of it here right now. I want to get there because the standards, which are a part of this whole forum sponsorship, the reason for it, they appear in that bit to become awfully important to me. Now that we're going to have industrial solutions, consumer-based solutions, business, the APIs and the ability to interconnect becomes fundamentally important across a range of industrial devices plus the network communications. How important is that piece, and how are we doing on the standards front?
Yeah, I think we're making some good progress on that. I think we're not there yet. We are, as we virtualize the network and cloudify a lot of network functions into the edge cloud setup, those standards are being discussed around cloud network functions and the exposition of that. We call network function exposure function in exposing the 5G core. We have opened up the O-RAN alliance. We're working with that. So I think that's all going well. I think the key point is, I think David talked about network slicing and other things. So there are multiple which ways you could actually start to deliver on the promise of the industrials, either through network slices, through an operator, or what we are also seeing a big trend in building private networks. So imagine, I think Shannon talked about this industrial zone where you have the airport, the port, manufacturing, they all have their edge private networks. And so as you start to go into the upper layers, if you will, and you have an edge cloud instances, there could be federation of sort, and that security and privacy will play an important. So there's no wonder why security around 5G and privacy is so important. And that's why whoever builds the local edge infrastructure will actually be in a very important position. And there's a lot of discussion around standards around privacy and security as well, because those APIs that will be exposed will allow people to tap into the power of the network, but sort of protect the critical information for these industries. So I think that's roughly where things are. And one more point I want to reflect a little bit on that. The business cases that I and my team has worked on for ports and manufacturing others, in my mind, there is no two ways around that there is an absolute business case, because there is a big safety jump, there's a huge productivity jump, all that translates into financial setup. So for me, if I look at the big picture, if I'm doing a 30% year-over-year productivity growth in a manufacturing facility, that value can then be captured or shared in a way. So that the thing pays for itself. It's no longer a question about Toyota or Ferrari. It's a question of, am I investing in an infrastructure that allows overall growth for my economy? And that's really, really important for people to understand. And we can talk at length about examples around agriculture, where we have seen the yield improvement using the same assets deliver more in terms of the reduction of cost for using precision farming. We have been doing trials with some number of farms at the moment using 5G plus technologies, remote sensors, private networks, etc., to look at complete reversal of that. And in our mind, if you look at agriculture in itself, if only 15 to 25% adopted this precision farming at the back of 5G plus technologies, we think it's going to be a huge change in terms of yield. And I have some numbers. We have predicted an increase in yields up to 300 million tons a year, a farming reduction cost of 100 billion, and reduction in water use by 150 billion cubic meters. That delivers a lot of benefit financially to the economies. And so if we have the social schemes set up, how then that money gets trickled in the economy, I think it's going to be interesting. And final point, reskilling is super, super important. We ventured on this thing in 2015, thinking about what the factory of the future looks like. We have implemented all these advanced technologies, but since 2015, we actually put in place reskilling programs. We didn't lay off people per se. We had moved them into different roles. No longer somebody's working on the floor. Now they're remotely diagnosing, controlling, manipulating, assembling, doing all these tasks with high reliability, high performance, mission critical connections over 5G network. So I think this is really important for us to get away from this notion of why do I invest in that? We are now equalizing post-COVID. All economies are emerging, and 5G and associated technology should be seen in a much more expansive way rather than an incremental way on a use case by use case basis.
So I let Fahd go on a little bit longer. We've only got 6 minutes left, really a little bit less. Give a longer answer, not least because he did exactly what I asked in the pre-call. He dropped in the numbers that I was asking for, and he's sitting on a massive amount of research. So I want to hear the whole answer. The interesting thing is, I could keep arguing, and I would love to. I think we're saying versions of the same thing. That delta that I point to is sort of still there. I don't disagree with your examples, and I think a number of us have those examples we're trying to get governments across. We've got that perception issue right now of it looks like a Ferrari to them, and they are going to have to retool their economy, which doesn't negate your point. It actually makes it a lot more heartbreaking and urgent right now. They are going to need to retool their economies and their workforces. Yeah. But the other bit that we're across, and you're both pointing to it, that interoperability piece, we're still in a siloed world right now, even at this point where the governments have suddenly got that everyone needs to be on the network. That's a real challenge for us to get the investment. That's right.
But one thing though, the reason the perception of Ferrari exists, because we somehow are still turning to the telcos to make the investments. These guys have made massive investments in the past. They have a lot of return that they have to still capture. And so now they're thinking about, oh my God, I have to pay for spectrum. I have to build this new asset. What is now happening, guys, that the landscape is changing. There are new players coming in. Tower companies are playing a role. There are web scalers who are playing. Enterprise are building their private networks. Application providers are coming in. New players are emerging, and telcos are obviously a key critical component. So governments have to incentivize guys to make this happen.
So let me ask you one question. I'm going to hand it to David, but let me ask you, for Shannon's case of, because you said it depends on who builds that network underlay. That's right. Or who's going to build that, Fahd? Who's going to build it?
For me, it pays for itself. If I am going to the port of whatever that city is.
Is it going to be the telco? Is it going to be the normal network operator?
Yeah, it can. There are two business models. So for example, if I am True or somebody in Thailand, I can build a managed private network and say to the port, I'm going to offer this as a service to you, and then you can give me a certain subscription fee based on the outcomes and delivering. That's hard work for telcos because they are transforming in that space. Second thing is, the private networks can be built by the enterprises themselves and then sort of automate their operations.
And so they are now.
And it will pay for itself, guys. We got to evangelize this and make sure people understand.
Let me give David and Manish a chance to respond. David, maybe you want to give a quick response if you do, but I can also get you to give just a very quick answer to the sidebar question of whether we still have that digital divide. What role, if any, has 5G to play in rural areas? If not, we've got a problem on our hands, really, for that scope and scale issue around, for example, 6 gigahertz. Do you want to give it a quick answer to that? And I'm going to give Manish a chance to answer the next question.
Well, I think this is maybe good for Manish. The essential problem is how do you backhaul the base station? You know, if there's no fiber in the ground, and this is one of the issues. For example, in India, there's no sort of situation of well leaves where you can no legal sort of setup where you can sort of start digging holes to put fiber in, and this is sort of one of the limitations. You can backhaul it on microwave, and then you can supply 5G coverage, you know, with microwave backhaul. Manish is probably much more of an expert on that than me. So, but that would be one of the issues where we can provide 5G coverage by going in and bypassing the fixed network that way.
Yeah. Manish, maybe you want to pick up on this one. Also, the next question we've got there, because it brings us full circle now. So what do you think the private network will impact the operators? How are the operators going to do in this inversion that Fahad's arguing for? Shannon's giving us examples for. I actually believe they're correct. So you want to give some responses to those ones?
Sure. And I think the answer to all these questions leads to one direction, which is, look, the operators worldwide, they are struggling. I mean, you know, they are having issues in terms of their profitability and monetizing, you know, whatever they've invested so far. whether it is on the spectrum side or on the network side. And then here comes 5G, right? I mean, just buying a spectrum and saying that, okay, we are 5G ready is not going to make it. I mean, you got to have the ecosystem in place. You got to invest a lot more on the application side. I mean, there's a lot more that needs to be done, not just by operators, but many other players, right? And that's where we come in, which is, what we are telling the operators is that, look, you guys need to focus on your forte, on your core, which is, trying to offer applications, and providing the right quality of service to your subscribers. We come in and we can handle all your passive infrastructure, whether it is towers or fiber or in-building solution, or as we move forward, all these edge data centers that are required, right? They will be requiring a lot of investments, right? So this is where the digital infra cores or power cores can play a significant role. And I'm not talking only about money here, right? Money is not going to solve the problem. It's also about us coming in with that capability, that understanding that what it takes to make it up and running, right? So we are not the banks to the operators. We are a hand in glove partner to them. We are bringing in money so that they can unlock the the value on their network side, and then we also offer them expertise, whether it is on the operation and maintenance side, whether it is deploying some of these new technologies, the innovation that comes with it, right? And then the operator can focus on their core and or private network. So I think the answer to some of these questions, Peter, here is that the way industry has been working should change, right? And it has started working that way. Australia, I gave you an example. It is happening in Indonesia. It is happening in Philippines. It is happening in pretty much across Asia now. And I'm not going into other parts of the world. It has already started there. But definitely in Asia, the momentum has started. And I think if we start moving in that direction, then some of the problems which Shannon is facing, right, from a POC point of view, I mean, the industry will come there to help her out, and maybe we can find some solution together.
It's a nice message to sort of come to the end on. We're right on time. Fuad, did you have a chance to see the sidebar question? Otherwise, I'm going to.
I haven't read the full one, but I think I'd say the following. I think there is a traditional way how we have in a regulatory regime incentivized build networks. You got to have 99% coverage, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at the private networking thinking, the cost structures are very different. So the return of investment question the gentleman or somebody is asking here is actually the complexion, the cost economics, the performance trades-off are different. So I think we got to get into this a little bit more, but I think it is also a great opportunity for telcos because there's a consumer business, call it the assets business, and then there's this enterprise industrial piece, which if they can't start to get into, it could be a premium offering because they need local trusted solutions. And guess what? Telcos are local, right? They're trusted, not somebody coming from outside. So I think it's a fascinating conversation, and we should continue this dialogue.
Yeah.
John, I'm assuming that the question was what the hand raised was going to cover. So in the interests of that, yeah, I think given that we're actually past time. Kevin, do you want to just shine the light on Professor Ure as long as he promises to be 10 seconds or less, just to make sure I've covered off his question?
Sure.
John? You have the floor, or I take it back because we're late. There you go.
No, you can take it back. I've put my questions on the sidebar. I can follow up by emails.
Please do, John.
And thank you very much, everybody. I thought they're very excellent contributions.
Really great contributions. I'd really echo that. Really worthwhile. I think you're going to get a lot of people following up. I'd like to thank you on behalf of our ASEAN friends who've shown up for this. But really, thank you so much to all of you, to Manish, to Fuad, to David, to Shannon. Excellent presentations. And I couldn't be happier, except that we ran it too much interest in too short a time again. We'll come back to you. So can I, on behalf of the Australia ASEAN Digital Trade Standards Initiative and my colleagues in ASEAN at RMIT, at Access Partnership, and with the whole Standards Initiative, thank you very much. We're going to wrap it up now. Thank you
guys.
Bye-bye. Take care all.
Thank you for having me.